Hello, and welcome to this Thinking and Working Politically Community of Practice podcast for this month's newsletter. I'm Gareth Williams from the Policy Practice, and I'm joined by two of my Nigerian colleagues from the company, Dr. Suwaiba Ahmad and Sunny Kulutuye. Nigeria is a country where you can't escape politics, particularly at the moment, when we're on the eve of presidential and state-level elections. But I'll be asking my colleagues, Sunny and Suwaiba, to take a step back from the here and now and to think about how over the course of their careers, thinking and working politically has helped them in their work as development practitioners, how they've used the approach, how important it's been, and what difference it's made to them. Just to introduce our two guests today, Dr. Suwaiba Ahmad is a trained educationalist, gender advocate and consultant. She's been working in the field of education for 17 years. She's an associate professor in Bayero University in Kano, Nigeria, and is currently a director of its Center for Gender Studies. My friend Sunny Kulutuye is a seasoned development consultant with over 25 years of field experience in development and governance reform, having worked extensively in areas of political economy, institutional analysis, project monitoring, and evaluation. So let's kick off the discussion. Perhaps we could start off by looking at the big picture. If you could tell us a bit about the Nigeria political economy context and why this makes development programming challenging and why this makes a thinking and working politically approach important.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. My name is Mr. Sunny Kulutuye. In terms of the political situation in Nigeria, thinking and working politically seems to be the best idea because of the context of Nigeria. One is that the oil discovery in far back late or early 70s has actually contributed to the problems that's affecting governance in Nigeria. Having discovered that oil, the attention has been shifted from internally generated revenue to the federal allocation in terms of oil money. And that has put the politicians under pressure to see what they get and not what they deliver as service to the people. And that tension between the struggle for the fund, for the resources from oil and the need for service delivery has created a political situation in Nigeria that is causing crisis between what we can call the rich and the poor. And the rich and the poor in the sense are the key politicians, not even the private sector, but the key politicians have hijacked the system in the way to favor themselves and without delivering services that are needed at the community level. And having that at the end, that tension in terms of struggle for resources has created a corruption system in Nigeria that is so high and so indebted in the life of politicians that nobody goes into politics. Or let me know you say nobody. Very many of them go into politics because of what they want to get for themselves and their families and not what they want to deliver to the society. And that corruption situation has also given birth to so many crisis situations in Nigeria. You can hear about the Boko Haram that is fighting. It's as a result of corruption because there's no money, no service delivery in the communities. You hear of kidnapping these days in Nigeria. People are kidnapped for ransom. It's because people are agitated that the resources available for the many Nigerians are being utilized by very few people. So these tensions is continuing. But what is happening now is that this civil society has gotten to the level where that awareness has been created that they are rising against such tensions. And this is why thinking and working politically is very important, because thinking and working politically helps us to dissect the situation and be able to profile possible immediate solutions that can be used to provide development. And in Nigeria, practically, I will give you an example. I talked about the issue of the police brutality in Nigeria and how the civil society rose up against it like 2 years ago. If you Google, you hear the word NSAS. It actually means police brutality and how the civil society rose up against it. It caught the government unaware because they never knew that spontaneously civil society will rise up against it from one state to the other. And that was why how that problem was able to be solved. And another practical problem situation that we also created, that I will also mention here, that in one of the states who want to do education analysis, we discovered that the private sector is eventually having more enrollment of people and students at the basic level than the public sector. Because the public sector has failed people, almost everybody is withdrawing their children and taking them to the private schools, and the private schools seems to be thriving. And these are supposed to be the key responsibilities of the government, to provide basic amenities, provide social services like education and that. But because of the corruption system the corruption in the system, that has made it almost like impossible.
Hello, I'm Dr. Suwaiba Ahmad, working together with Sunny and Gareth. What I want to add is, looking at the brief background given by Sunny, I want to add that another problem with working and thinking politically in Nigeria, especially in the North, has to do with issue around continuity. We have programs, we have governments coming in and going out, and then most of the times, because some of these governments are not from the same party, you discover that there is issue of continuity of those programs, or even issues around ownership, issues around incentive. Each government have its own incentive, each government have what it wants to do, and it's failed to build on already established programs in the state. For instance, one of the states I worked in, we have a program, a policy that is a very good policy that is almost at the point of being signed by the ESCO, but was dropped because the champion of that particular policy is no more in the same party with the present administration. So you see this kind of discontinuity, you see this kind of lack of continuity because of this different political party, different incentives among the politicians. And then apart from that also, you discover that we have a lot of policy. A lot of policy are in existence in the country, but then these policies are not being implemented. You discover that, for instance, in the education sector, you discover that we have different policy. We have policies that has to do with the teacher recruitment and deployment policy, or teacher policy. We have inclusive education policy. We have girls education policy. All these policies are there in existence, but they are not being implemented. And these policies, if they are going to be fully implemented, will have a very big difference in terms of how things are, in terms of how things are being done in the country, in terms of the development of education and education sector. But that's not the case. It's not been implemented. You discover that when you do an analysis, you discover that there are so many issues attached to lack of implementation of those policies. Some of the issue has to do with funding, and then some of the issues has to do with even the incentive by the government, by the politicians, because most of the times they do things that will create patronage, where they like to do things that are easily seen, things that the people will actually easily see. For instance, instead of building additional schools, they rather build roads and bridges that they can easily show and say that this is what they do. But they say that investment in education it takes a lot of funding, and then it's not something you can easily see in the near future. The credit may not be yours. So there is that. It depends on the incentive of the government. And then apart from that also, there is also, you discover that this issue in the North, especially issue of Boko Haram, issue of insecurity, issue of kidnapping has actually affected programs. Most programs are scared of the safety of their people. So you discover that some programs actually just stopped, while others were run but with caution, and it limited also access to some of this community because of the insurgency, because of the kidnapping cases. But notwithstanding, I can say that there is also a lot of opening, that there are opportunities. For instance, we have dedicated civil servants in service that are passionate about the system, that have put in a lot of effort to see how things can move forward positively. So we have them, and then we also have a system where we have a very well aware, a very well civil society organization. We have a lot of civil society organizations that are really fighting to hold the government accountable for some of the promises they do during campaign, and even to hold them accountable in terms of issues around budgetary allocations, budgetary releases. So so there is a lot of positive aspects also. There is a lot of opportunities in that regard. Things are gradually changing because, as I mentioned, the civil society, the public are now more aware of how to hold the government accountable of their actions, as we can see in the current situation that Nigeria is facing, the election and the ruling power and the people, what they are saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's fascinating from the big picture, but perhaps we can focus down on some of your professional experiences. Can you give us some examples of how you've applied a thinking and working politically approach in your work and what difference that's made to your work?
Gareth, there are so many, but let me just give one practical one that I remember in 2014-2015, I was engaged as a consultant on an EU water project in the Niger Delta, 5 states in the Niger Delta. And before I came in to myself and another colleague to do the political economy analysis and economy and institutional analysis, one of the challenges that we were having was that though they've signed tripartite agreement with the state government, but the state government were not paying part of their, they are not paying, contributing to the counterpart funding. That would become a bigger challenge for them. And they could not actually take off because EU project require that the government pay their counterpart funding before the project can actually commence. So for like almost a year, they were just paying salaries of the staff that they recruited, and there was no practical activity going on in the field. So when we came in to do the political economy analysis, we now realized that one of the challenges that was facing the project was because the governors were not responding. They did not take it as a responsibility to provide services in that area of water to the community. To start with, in Niger Delta, everywhere you go, you see water, but not all the water is drinkable. So they felt that, and the other part of it was that the EU project then was trying to commercialize water to a certain level, that water should not just be a social goods, but a kind of a commercial activity that community could pay some money. So also, two level, government was not responding, now convincing the community to say water is not going to be a social good, but a commercial good was a challenge. So when we now did the political economy analysis and institutional analysis, we now came up with, we went back to the drawing board, looking at political thinking and working politically. We now came up with two options. One, at the government level, we now identified, okay, since we are finding it difficult for government to pay their counterpart fund, and the counterpart fund from the government we are talking about is only at the head of the hem of our the executive governors of the state are actually the people that are responsible. So what we then agreed was, why don't we then look at what we call the reform champions within the state? Who are these reform champions? They might be in government, they might not be in government, but people that the governors can have listening here, that can actually call the attention of the governor, and they will now be able to sell the idea of this water project to them. So when these ideas were suggested, and we had a long list, but it was prone down to who are the most influencer persons among all of them, and these were the people that were used, and eventually the counterpart fund was paid. Now, at a part of the community that to convince the community to actually get water as a commercial, not as a social good, was another challenge. So what we then do was that we also went back to say, why don't you first of all do an advocacy to the communities and then mobilize the few people it could be one, it could be two persons in the community who are also influential, who should have this understanding that yes, for us to sustain this water, we need to pay more money, and use those ones also to sell the idea to the community. And some of the people identify some of the traditional rulers who are very influential and they are illiterate. So we propose the idea, yes, a water project is going to be constructed in your environment, but this water project require generators that need to be repaired. Government does not have the resources to be pumping for you to be into the system to repair these facilities all the time. So it's required that you need to raise money from this water project to sustain the project. So it's not that we are going to be selling the water as such, but like putting a small amount of money that can be raised and used to service the project. And that was what happened. And all the communities bought into the idea and the project was completed. Thank you. That's a particular example I can give for now.
Thank you, Sonny. It sounds like a fascinating example where you both looked at the top-down problem of the lack of political will, and you came up with methods and approaches that help to build and strengthen that political will by using reform champions, but you were also looking at the bottom-up operation and maintenance of the water schemes through communities and building that demand. That's a really concrete and fascinating example. Thanks very much, Sunny. Suwaiba, do you have an example for us?
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. The example I can give you is we did a political economy analysis of the education sector in Kano State between 2019 to 2020. Actually, in the case of then the political economy analysis, part of the problem of education, that is the political economy analysis in the education sector, we have issues around access, equity, and quality. So there are a lot of challenges in that field. And then because of patronage by the governor, he was actually interested in giving free education for all. He actually made a pronouncement immediately he come into seat the second time, that is in 2019, that education is completely free. Already in Nigeria, basic education is free. But in the context of the governor, he is referring to that everything is free. No need for the parents to buy exercise book, notebook, and that was very popular. It's a selling point for the masses because of the level of poverty in Kano State. So they were very happy with that pronouncement. It increases enrollment. But then there is also another implication for that policy because it means there is a need for additional funding for education. It's actually brought about a point of engagement with the governor because the governor is interested in actually giving that, but then there are funding issues. There are so many issues attached to that particular pronouncement, and that is how we engage the governor. And then the issue around the existing law by Kwankwaso, which has to do with education tax law, which led to the creation of an agency, education support agency.
So, I mean, that's a very interesting example where you've used a thinking, working politically perspective to identify what it was that the governor himself was interested in, what would be a popular policy. So kind of working with the grain of the political system and the patronage dynamics you've described, and using that as an entry point to push the reform process further. So I think that's a very smart and interesting example you've raised. Thanks very much. So thank you, colleagues, for two excellent examples of how you've been using thinking and working politically in Nigeria. Could you just perhaps reflect a bit on what are the practical challenges of using this approach in the Nigerian context itself?
Yeah, one of the challenges I can mention is sometimes getting information that is politically sensitive can be very difficult. For instance, when you are thinking and working politically, you do need data to do some of those analysis, and then you discover that there are sensitive data that you may find it very difficult to get. Not that the data is not available, but then the officer to give you the data is scared of the implication of that data and how we are going to use that data. So it's also one of the major, because I faced a similar challenge whereby I'm looking for that on the teachers' attrition, that is a retirement, teachers that are getting out of service. And because of the nature of that data and because of the number of teachers that are retiring and then employment is not being done, it's a very sensitive data that it becomes very difficult to lay my hands on that data. And then apart from that, also when you're doing stakeholder mapping, sometimes some of those key actors you want to identify, you need government officials to actually give you insight into this, whether who is reform-minded, because you may not really know each of those individuals. You need to talk to others that can tell you. And others, normally, they prepare to give you a politically correct interpretation of someone's incentive, of someone's interest. Nobody will come out and tell you and say that the governor has no interest in education. So sometimes it's very difficult to actually be able to get someone to open up and actually talk about who is serving as a bottleneck, who can help you, who can assist you. Sometimes you need to camouflage. I don't want to use the word camouflage, but sometimes you need to really tell them that the information you are getting from them is information for internal use and it's not information that you can publicize that others can lay their hands on. So it's really also a challenge to do that. And then sometimes issues around marginalized group, giving them a voice is a problem. I'm a woman, I'm educated. We have a lot of us in Nigeria. We have a lot of us in the northern part of the country. But sometimes you discover that we are still not in the decision-making hierarchy. You discover that we are still marginalized in terms of being in a position where we do major decisions. Not only women, but you discover that special needs. There are a lot of marginalized groups that their voice are not really heard when you talk about decision-making. So all this can actually affect. We are fighting for inclusion, we are fighting for justice, but then the decision makers there are people that may not be sensitive to these issues around marginalized group, issues around safety. So it's a challenge really if you are thinking and working politically.
Thank you very much for your very realistic and candid assessments. Just to finish off, I can't stop thinking about the elections happening over the next few days. And these are proving to be much more interesting and contested than ever. But perhaps taking a step back from that and the bigger picture of social, economic and political change in Nigeria, do you think that things are different this time in the elections, or is patronage politics just as entrenched as ever? Do you see any changes in the political economy of Nigeria, and what does this mean for development cooperation?
Well, what I can say is for the first time in history of Nigeria's election, we can say that we are seeing a very different thing from the normal thing, which is right from before the election, you can be able to predict who is going to be the winner. We normally have two powerful existing parties, that is APC, PDP. But for this current election, we now have 4 parties that are contesting, and each of those parties, they have a strong hold. So you can be very sure with certainty, you cannot predict with certainty that who will emerge as the winner in the country. And then apart from that also, because of this dilemma of social media, there is a lot, and apart from that also a lot of sensitization. We have civil society organizations that are doing a lot of sensitizing the people with regard to their votes, as it's their right. Over the media now, there are jingles saying that if you sell your vote for 5,000 naira, at the end of the day, you are selling your vote for 4 naira per day. So it's now sinking on the people that they have a right. Whatever they do today, whatever they do during the election has a repercussion of to 4 years of that particular tenure of the elect. Especially during this current, you can see that currently Nigeria is facing so many hardship because of so many policies that are put in place and there are no proper actually plan for the implementation of those policies. So everybody is facing a lot of hardship. There is no currency in the country, there is no fuel. So everybody is actually facing a situation whereby he's not happy, and therefore people are now, both at the rural and the urban community, are becoming more sensitive on the need to actually select a leader that can actually change the focus of Nigeria, that can help in actually improving livelihood. So people are becoming more conscious, and youths are also moving into the dilemma of politics. So it gives an opening of engaging these youth CSOs and the public in how to actually ensure that we have good leadership in the state. So it's really a very interesting thing, seeing how things are moving. We wait and see the result of tomorrow's election.
So this political situation is dynamic and is happening, and a lot of change is coming into the system. And I agree totally that this is the time actually that thinking and working politically will be needed in Nigeria to be able to begin to predict some of these things that are occurrences in Nigeria, and be able to say, yes, this is the line that we can do in terms of development work. So I think that's the part I will quickly comment on.
Thank you very much. That's a really interesting set of perspectives, and it's great to end on some positive notes about real changes that we're seeing in this election, particularly as we began the discussion with quite a bleak picture about how challenging the political economy context is in Nigeria. great to hear about some positive tendencies that you're observing right now. So thank you very much to Suwaiba Ahmad and Sunny Kulutuye. Thank you very much for sharing your insights on thinking and working politically in Nigeria. Goodbye, listeners.